the next challenge. So every event in a startup is both a culmination and also a new beginning. So you raise money and you think, oh, now it's time to celebrate, but then you realize, uh-oh, now we actually have to figure out what to spend that money on. Or you sign a big customer contract, and then, of course, you celebrate, but then wait, I have to now deliver a product for that customer, or God forbid you hire people, and then now you're responsible to them for what happens next. And this event is true. That's true of this event, too. It's a culmination, not really just for me personally, of something that I've been working on for a while, but of a movement that has catalyzed around these ideas that I really believe is changing the face of entrepreneurship worldwide. And so I want to thank you all for being part of that movement. I want to celebrate today that we've come this far, but to remind us that actually this is just the beginning. You are all the very strange early adopters of a new idea. And like all visionary customers, the number one question you have to ask is not why aren't there more of them, but instead, what's wrong with you? Right? Why are you here and not like the 99.99% of people in the world who aren't? What is it that makes this moment, this idea, this time special? And more importantly, what is our obligation to the future generations of entrepreneurs to carry these ideas forward? So it's important to look back and to recognize we all stand on the shoulders of giants, several of whom you're going to hear from today. You're going to hear from Steve Blank, creator of customer development. You're about to hear from Kent Beck, one of the signatories to the Agile Manifesto. You're going to hear from bloggers and entrepreneurs who have been part of taking these ideas from just voices in the wilderness to something that, like I said, is really changing the world. And I'm really excited about that, but I want us to keep our eyes firmly locked in both directions at the same time, which all entrepreneurs have to do, right? When we pivot, we keep one foot firmly in what we've learned so far and one foot in where we're headed. And so I want to just do a kind of a brief overview of what is the Lean Startup anyway, and what are the challenges that I think we face as a movement that today's conversation can be the beginning of trying to address. First, a note that entrepreneurship is awesome. In case we lose sight of that fact, it has never been a better time in the history of the world to be an entrepreneur. This magic thing we call software infects industries and has this interesting effect where it lowers barriers to entry, it causes chaos and disruption, it drives people crazy who are in established businesses, but that same disruption creates opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, and that's what all of us get to take advantage of. And so I want to talk about why even build a startup? What is the point? I really believe that entrepreneurship is not a very good way to make money. Okay, there are way easier ways, believe me. What entrepreneurship is uniquely good for is allowing us to simultaneously change the world, create value, and also make customers' lives better. And if you want to do all three of those things at the same time, if you have a vision and you want to see that through, then we owe it to ourselves as entrepreneurs to test the assumptions that underlie that vision to actually make sure it happens. And the history of entrepreneurship, especially lately and especially around here, has been rife with people failing their vision because they relied on untested assumptions. And I assume, at least all of you here know what I'm talking about. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So that's where we've been. Here's what the Lean Startup is all about. It begins with trying to put the practice of entrepreneurship on a more rigorous footing. And I think the first step in doing that is to have a clear definition of what is a startup. So for those of you who have seen me talk, I've said this phrase quite a lot in the last year, but I think it's a really important place to begin. A startup is a human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. This definition is as important for what it includes as for what it excludes. Because what makes you an entrepreneur is not what kind of noodles you eat. What matters is the context in which you operate. So it really has nothing to do with what kind of company you're in, what sector of the economy you're in, what industry you're in. And to prove it, I know we have quite a few actual entrepreneurs from inside big companies. I see friends from EA. I know we have a large contingent from MySpace here. I even saw a few Googlers who've come to say hello. These are not people who are like entrepreneurs, as in some kind of metaphor. They are entrepreneurs every bit as much as the two guys in a garage. Of course, we're trying to create disruptive innovation, not just anything new. And we're trying to not just build a great product, but build a company that can build great products, which means that entrepreneurship is management. And that doesn't sound very sexy. Let's be honest. When I tell most entrepreneurs this, they kind of look at me funny, because we have this image of what entrepreneurship is supposed to look like. It's supposed to be cool and hip and stylish. I don't know. It's supposed to somehow be funky and not like those guys who are MBAs who wear suits and who knows what else. And I understand that. That makes sense. There's a certain history of that kind of management that we have to recognize is not better or worse than entrepreneurial management. It's just different. General management is what allows us all to feed ourselves, clothe ourselves, and live thanks to the global supply chains that it has powered in the 20th century. But those same techniques, when transplanted into this context of extreme uncertainty, tend to go horribly, horribly wrong. And we're going to try to correct that today, and as part of this conversation going forward, to try to create a new discipline of entrepreneurial management science. We call that new discipline the lean startup because we're taking not just metaphorical inspiration, but direct inspiration from the lean manufacturing revolution, which changed the way people built products worldwide through a combination of new technology, but more importantly, new ideas. And in the lean technique, the first and most fundamental question is, what is the difference between a value-creating activity and a wasteful activity? And when you're building cars, that's hard enough, because you have this big question about, do the parts of the car represent progress or just the finished product? But as entrepreneurs, we have it even worse. We don't even know whether we're building a car, or do people want it, or is it actually a rocket ship, or a giraffe, or who knows? Right? We face extreme uncertainty, not just about the price point, not just about the distribution channels, but about every aspect of who the customer and product is. And that is why we use this definition of progress we're going to talk a lot about today, called validated learning about customers. That is, the unit of progress for entrepreneurship is learning, not execution. And the second big idea, and this is one, again, I've spoken about a fair bit this past year, is that once you understand the difference between value-creating activities and wasteful activities, and you eliminate the obvious waste, then you can focus on the fundamental feedback loop between when you have an idea and when you have learned whether that idea makes sense or not. And the heuristic that we're going to talk about today for how do you tell if a given startup process makes sense or not is, does it minimize the total time through this feedback loop or not? And then if you've seen any of my talks the past year, I've probably shown this slide at least 100 times. And I always say, and there's much more, and I only wish we had enough time to talk about all of these other amazing techniques in the lean startup, but of course we're out of time and you should read my blog or something else. But today, actually, believe it or not, we have the time to have that conversation, to say, well, okay, that sounds really interesting. That sounds like a good theory. But what does it actually look like in practice? What are the examples? What are the case studies? And more importantly, what are the dilemmas that come up when you actually start to race at this speed? Because when you're driving a race car, the issues you encounter are a little bit different than when you're driving your home automobile. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. This feedback loop is going to frame the whole conversation. So the agenda for the conference today is structured around these three major steps of the feedback loop: build, measure, learn. For each area, we have a keynote address. We have actual case studies from current practicing entrepreneurs that span the gamut. And then we're going to have a discussion about a specific dilemma in that area. So that's today. I think I wrote recently on my blog that it's a big step up for our movement to be misunderstood. That's a big step up from being ignored, which is where we were before. So congratulations, we're now being quite often misunderstood. I hope one day to be considered obvious. That will be the highest compliment that we can be paid one day. But at the moment, we're being misunderstood. And that's a good sign. That's how human beings assimilate new information, is first by ignoring it, then by denying it or misconstruing it. And like I said, then by considering it obvious. And so what I wanted to do is just talk about a couple of the myths about the lean startup that have caused a lot of confusion, not just to refute them, but actually because I believe that each of the misunderstandings reveals a kind of deeper truth about what we're trying to do that's really important. And so we all should be grateful to those misunderstandings for giving us a chance to talk about, well, what is this really? And to question our own assumptions about, hey, does this in fact make sense, or does it have some significant problems? So here are the misunderstandings I want to talk about. The first is that lean means cheap. That fundamentally, the way you become a lean startup is you spend as little money as possible, and you're very frugal, and that's to be commended. And I hope, for those who have been exposed to some of these ideas, you understand that lean is really not about cost, it is about speed. And that's as true in the lean startup as it was in lean manufacturing. It's true that lean startup techniques allow us to waste less money, but there are lots of moments when being a lean startup allows you to invest more money more profitably, because you actually understand who the customer is, and you understand how to drive adoption of your product in a positive way. The other thing I want to say about this is that there's no gold star. You don't get a gold star for being frugal as an entrepreneur. You only get a gold star for achieving the results that we talked about at the top, that is, creating value, building an organization, and changing the world. And so the fundamental idea of Lean Startup is to help you do that faster, get to your final destination faster. And if that involves being frugal at some times and spending big at other times, the bigger question is, well, how do we even know what to spend on? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Second myth is that the Lean Startup is only for Web 2.0, consumer, internet, something, software companies. That's the easiest way to kind of compartmentalize a new idea so it doesn't apply to you, is to say, well, of course, it sounds like a great idea for those other people. But of course, in my business, we don't suffer these issues. And I think we're starting to get the memo worldwide that there are no such thing as safe industries anymore. That disruption, if it hasn't already come to your company, is coming soon to an industry near you. And so anyone who faces fundamental uncertainty about what customers will want in the future, that is, anyone trying to create disruptive innovation, fundamentally can benefit from Lean Startup techniques. And the more uncertainty, the more benefit. Myth number 3, that Lean Startups are small and bootstrapped startups. And I have a lot of respect for the bootstrappers in the room and who are watching us worldwide. We're going to hear from some today in case studies. There's nothing wrong with being bootstrapped. There's nothing wrong with taking VC capital. But asking, is that the right way to build a startup in general is like asking how tall should you be to be an entrepreneur. It's a just irrelevant issue. The question is, for your particular business, what is the right amount of capital to invest? And more importantly, when is the right time to make those investments? As our friends who have sponsored the conference who are on the venture side have discovered, there is actually opportunities to make new kinds of venture investments by investing in companies that have already proven their business in microscale. And we're going to hear from several of them today. Last myth, this is the worst, that Lean Startups intend to replace vision with data and customer feedback. This is the most difficult one to refute because the persistent myth of the solitary visionary founder who just casts a spell and then reality conforms is what you read about in the press whenever you hear about a successful startup. It is a never-ending story, and it, of course, has the worst kind of adverse selection bias because you never hear the story of all those crazy visionaries who drove their company right into the ground through grit and perseverance. So if you're in a startup, how do you know if you're following a visionary or a delusional crazy person? We've talked a lot about that in the Lean Startup. It's a very real issue. And we also talk about this thing called the reality distortion field, the ability of visionary founders to convince people in their vicinity to believe things as if they were true that are not, strictly speaking, actually true, which, as we've noted, cult leaders and sociopaths also share. And so how do you know if that's about to happen to you or you're about to be on the cover of Time magazine with your great visionary? The goal of the Lean Startup is to validate the elements of the vision that make sense and reject the ones that are insane before it's too late. So when we say fail fast, we don't mean the company should fail fast, quite the contrary. We want the bad ideas to fail fast so that they can get out of the way and make room for the ideas that will allow the vision to come to fruition. With me so far? So here are the questions I want to pose for today. And I want to invite anybody else, you're on the Twitter hashtag, so you can speak too, to pose other questions, both to our speakers. We have mics set up for people to ask questions in the room. You're welcome to ask the questions of each other and to talk during the breaks, talk to our mentors. Here are the questions I want to ask. What does progress look like in a startup? How do we know if we are making progress? If I spent the day as a software engineer and I wrote lines of code and they're good, did I actually make progress for my company? A lot of times the answer is no. How do I know the difference? How do you know it's time to pivot? Right? We all know that perseverance is the best entrepreneurial technique unless it's persevering you straight into the ground. So how do I know when it's time to have that weird combination of flexibility and determination? What is the minimum viable product? And is it for minimal products or not? Do Lean Startup methods scale? This is going to be really interesting. We're going to hear from some of my colleagues at IMVU. I've been telling stories about IMVU now for quite a while. Those stories, some people notice, are 5 years old. And they're like, yeah, I get you could do continuous deployment, all that other crazy stuff with 5 people in a garage. But does that work for a 75-person company? We're going to find out. And most importantly, how do we reconcile vision and customer data? How can we stay true to the vision of what we want to see happen in the world while also taking in all this fundamentally important information about reality? That is the magic of entrepreneurs. They're able to hold those two contradictory ideas in their head simultaneously. That their vision is brilliant and it definitely, absolutely will change the world, and also that it's horribly flawed and it's probably fatal. Right? That creates cognitive dissonance. That gives you a headache. And the thing about entrepreneurs is not that they don't get the headache, but that they want to see the vision realized more, and they're willing to put up with it. And today what we want to talk about is what are the tools we can use to reconcile those two ideas in a successful way. Before we get to the formal content, I just wanted to share kind of one more personal thing. Despite appearances, I'm actually a relatively quiet person, and I never really thought that this is the kind of thing I would do for a living, whatever it is exactly. And so you have to realize that it was almost exactly 1 year ago that I gave the first public speech about the Lean Startup at all. I mean, I didn't really have the courage to utter that phrase in public very often because, like I said before, people were ignoring me. They were thinking it was ridiculous. And I really had to think about, all right, why am I doing that? What is my intention in getting up in front of all these people and kind of proclaiming this message? And how can I do that in a way that's not about me, but it's about all of us together? And I really visualized this thing. I said, all right, I want to really picture that moment in the startups that I've been in that failed. There's this moment, some of you will recognize, where you know it's not going to happen. You feel it. It's the worst feeling I can describe. You've invested, I don't know how much time and energy, how many dollars from investors, the years of people's lives. And as a founder, as someone who kind of sees it a little bit clearly, usually you know first. So you have that moment, you say, oh my God, this thing is actually going to come apart. Of course, rare for founders to actually say that out loud, but they know, they have that feeling in their gut and they carry it around. And I thought, if these techniques work, then out there right now is even just one entrepreneur who's about to have that experience, maybe today, have that realization. And if these techniques can help just a little bit to get them to make the realization and say, wait a minute, there is time to change, to take a different course, to be more likely to be successful. If there's even one of you listening right now who has that realization, then I think all of this is worthwhile. And so what we want to do together is reach every one of those people who can make that change tomorrow. Not next year when we come out of stealth mode, not 2 years from now when we finally raise money, not 3 years from now when we finally quit our job and start a company, but tomorrow to catalyze that change, to say, it is not too late, there is a better way. So with that, I want to thank you all very, very much for being here. This is an unbelievable turnout. Hello to our friends around the globe. Please keep tweeting your comments and thoughts. We will make you part of the event. And we're just going to take a moment to do some laptop switchovers, so stay put. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you.